My name is Maria, and I've been cleaning bathrooms for wealthy families for over 15 years. You'd be amazed at what people throw away in their trash cans, thinking no one will ever look. But when you're a housekeeper, you see everything. You notice when someone's routine changes, when new items appear, when old habits disappear. And today, I found something in the Morrison family's master bathroom that made my blood run cold. A positive pregnancy test, hidden under tissues and cotton balls like someone was desperately trying to conceal it. The problem? Nobody in this house could possibly be pregnant. If you've ever worked in someone's home and discovered something that didn't make sense, something that made you question everything you thought you knew about a family, hit that subscribe button right now. I'm going to tell you a story that will make you look at wealthy families very differently. Let me tell you about the Morrison family. I've been working for them for 4 years now, cleaning their massive estate 3 times a week. There's Mr. James Morrison, 62 years old, a successful investment banker who's had a vasectomy. I know this because I've overheard enough conversations between him and his wife to know every detail of their medical history. There's Mrs. Patricia Morrison, 58 years old, who went through menopause 5 years ago and tells everyone who will listen that she's thrilled to be done with all that reproductive nonsense. Then there are their children. Well, I say children, but they're adults now. Their daughter Emma is 26 and lives in Seattle with her girlfriend. She visits maybe twice a year for holidays. Their son Michael is 28, married to a lovely woman named Sarah, and they live in Chicago. They have their own house, their own life, and haven't lived in this mansion for over 6 years. So when I found that pregnancy test this morning, wrapped carefully in tissues and shoved to the bottom of the master bathroom's wastebasket, my mind started racing. Who in this house could possibly need a pregnancy test? And more importantly, why were they hiding it? I've been cleaning the Morrison house every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for 4 years. I know every inch of that place. I know Mrs. Patricia's skincare routine, Mr. James's prescription medications, and exactly what brands of everything they use. I know that Mrs. Patricia throws away her expensive face masks after one use, that Mr. James has been taking medication for high blood pressure, and that neither of them has had visitors stay overnight in months. But I also know that something has been different in that house for the past 6 weeks. It started with small changes. Mrs. Patricia, who usually greets me with coffee and wants to chat about her garden club activities, has been avoiding me. She'll disappear upstairs when I arrive and stay hidden until I'm working on the lower level of the house. Mr. James, who used to leave for his office at exactly 7:30 every morning, has been leaving earlier and coming home later. The house itself has felt different too. There have been hushed phone conversations that stop abruptly when I enter a room. I found extra dishes in the sink suggesting someone has been eating meals that I didn't prepare or see evidence of. And most strangely, I've been finding clothes in the laundry that don't belong to either Mr. James or Mrs. Patricia. Women's clothes, but not Mrs. Patricia's style at all. Younger, trendier pieces. A sundress that was definitely a size smaller than anything in Mrs. Patricia's closet. A pair of jeans that were a completely different brand from what she usually wore. Underwear that was lacy and colorful, nothing like Mrs. Patricia's conservative cotton undergarments. At first, I thought maybe Emma had come for a surprise visit and I'd missed seeing her. But Emma's car wasn't in the driveway, and Mrs. Patricia would have mentioned if her daughter was visiting. She always gets excited about Emma's visits and wants to make sure the house is perfect. Then I considered that maybe they were having guests stay over that I didn't know about. But the guest rooms showed no signs of being used. The beds were still perfectly made with the decorative pillows arranged exactly as I had left them. The guest bathrooms were untouched. That's when I started paying closer attention to details I might have missed before. 3 weeks ago, I noticed that someone had been using the master bathroom shower at unusual times. Mrs. Patricia always showered at night after her yoga class, and Mr. James showered every morning at 6:15 before work. But I was finding the shower damp at times when neither of them should have been using it. 2 weeks ago, I found a coffee mug in the sink that neither of them would have used. The Morrisons drink their coffee from expensive china cups that match their dining set.
This was a simple ceramic mug with a design I'd never seen before in their kitchen. And last week, I discovered something that made me realize someone else had definitely been in that house. I was organizing Mrs. Patricia's medicine cabinet, something I do monthly to check for expired items, when I noticed that her expensive moisturizer was nearly empty. This was a jar that had been almost full just 2 weeks earlier. Mrs. Patricia uses that moisturizer sparingly because it costs over $100. There was no way she had used that much product in such a short time. But the most telling evidence came from the trash. As a housekeeper, you learn to notice patterns in what people throw away. The Morrisons generated a predictable amount of waste each week. Mr. James threw away business documents, old newspapers, and the occasional takeout container. Mrs. Patricia discarded beauty products, gardening magazines, and food packaging from her healthy meal preparations. But recently, I'd been finding items that didn't fit their patterns. Makeup remover wipes in brands that Mrs. Patricia didn't use, empty bottles of shampoo that wasn't the expensive organic brand she insisted on, food containers from restaurants that delivered to areas across town, nowhere near where the Morrisons would normally order from. Someone else was definitely living in that house, at least part-time. Someone who was trying very hard to not be noticed. And now I'd found a positive pregnancy test. I stared at that plastic stick for a full 5 minutes, my cleaning supplies forgotten on the bathroom counter. The 2 pink lines were clear and unmistakable. Someone had taken this test, seen that they were pregnant, and then tried to hide the evidence. But who? And why were they hiding in the Morrison house? My first thought was that maybe Emma had come for a surprise visit and hadn't told her parents about a pregnancy. But Emma lived with her girlfriend, and they'd been trying to adopt a child for the past year. If Emma were pregnant, it would be the most celebrated news in the Morrison family. She wouldn't be hiding it.
My second thought was more disturbing. What if Mr. James was having an affair? What if he was bringing someone to the house during the day while Mrs. Patricia was at her various social activities? That would explain the strange clothes, the unfamiliar toiletries, and the different eating patterns I'd been noticing. But if Mr. James was having an affair, why would his mistress be taking pregnancy tests in his wife's bathroom? And why would she be leaving evidence where it could easily be found? That's when I realized something that made my stomach drop. What if Mrs. Patricia knew about the other woman? What if she was allowing someone to stay in her house? What if this wasn't an affair, but something even more complicated? I thought about all the changes I'd observed in the Morrison household over the past 6 weeks. Mrs. Patricia's sudden desire to avoid me, Mr. James' altered schedule, the appearance of items that belonged to a younger woman, the secretive phone calls and hushed conversations. What if they were hiding someone? What if someone was living in their house who wasn't supposed to be there? I finished cleaning the master bathroom in a daze, my mind racing with possibilities. I wrapped the pregnancy test back up in tissues and placed it exactly where I'd found it. But I took a photo with my phone first. If this situation was as complicated as I was beginning to suspect, I might need evidence later. The rest of the house felt different as I continued my cleaning routine. I found myself looking for clues I might have missed before, paying attention to details that I'd previously overlooked. In the kitchen, I noticed that someone had been using the coffee maker more frequently than usual. The Morrisons were very particular about their coffee, using an expensive espresso machine that required specific beans and precise measurements. But someone had been using the regular drip coffee maker, and they'd been drinking a lot more coffee than the 2 Morrison adults typically consumed. In the living room, I found a book tucked behind a couch cushion. It was a pregnancy guide, well-worn and filled with handwritten notes. The handwriting wasn't Mrs. Patricia's elegant script, and it certainly wasn't Mr. James's messy scrawl. This was someone else's book, someone who was actively preparing for pregnancy and childbirth. But the most shocking discovery came when I was cleaning the guest bathroom on the 2nd floor. Hidden behind extra toilet paper rolls, I found an entire collection of pregnancy-related items: prenatal vitamins, morning sickness remedies, and even a small ultrasound photo tucked inside an envelope.
The ultrasound photo was dated 3 weeks ago, and it showed a tiny figure that was clearly a developing baby. On the back, someone had written 12 weeks in the same handwriting I'd seen in the pregnancy book. Someone was definitely pregnant. Someone was living in this house, and the Morrison family was helping them hide it. But who was this mystery woman, and why did she need to stay hidden? I spent the rest of the morning cleaning with these questions burning in my mind. Every room I entered, I looked for more clues about the identity of this secret resident. I checked closets for hidden clothes, searched drawers for personal items, and examined every trash can for additional evidence. By lunchtime, I had a clear picture of what was happening in the Morrison house, but I still didn't know who the pregnant woman was or why she needed to hide her condition. What I did know was that someone, young, pregnant, and scared, was living in secret in one of the wealthiest houses in the city. Someone who was depending on the Morrison family for protection and privacy during what was clearly a difficult time in her life. The question that haunted me as I finished my work that day was simple. What was this family hiding, and what would happen if their secret was discovered?
I couldn't stop thinking about the pregnant woman hiding in the Morrison house. Over the next week, I paid attention to every detail, trying to piece together who she was and why she needed to remain hidden. What I discovered was more shocking than anything I could have imagined. It started with a pattern I noticed in the laundry. The extra clothes I'd been finding weren't just any women's clothes. They were maternity clothes, carefully hidden among Mrs. Patricia's regular laundry. Stretchy pants with expandable waistbands, loose-fitting tops designed to accommodate a growing belly, and specialized undergarments that I recognized from my own pregnancies years ago. But these weren't new clothes. They were well worn, like someone had been wearing them for months. The tags had been removed, and some pieces showed signs of frequent washing. This told me that whoever was wearing them had been pregnant for a while and had been living in the Morrison house longer than I'd initially realized. The next clue came from observing the family's behavior more closely. Mrs. Patricia, who used to spend her mornings tending to her elaborate garden, had started staying inside during my work hours. But I noticed that she would often carry extra food upstairs, claiming she was having a late breakfast in bed. Except the portions were too large for one person, and she was carrying items that she normally didn't eat: fresh fruit, whole grain crackers, and ginger tea. Exactly the kinds of foods that help with morning sickness. Mr. James had changed his routine even more dramatically. He used to work from his home office 2 days a week, but now he was leaving the house every single morning and not returning until late afternoon. It was like he was deliberately staying away to give someone privacy and space. The most telling evidence came from the trash patterns I'd been tracking. Whoever was living in the house was generating waste that suggested someone dealing with pregnancy symptoms: empty bottles of ginger capsules, used tissues that suggested frequent nausea, and food containers from specific restaurants that specialized in bland, pregnancy-friendly meals. But the breakthrough came on a Wednesday morning when I arrived at the house earlier than usual. Mrs. Patricia's car was gone, which was normal for her Wednesday morning book club meetings. Mr. James had already left for work. The house should have been empty. But as I unlocked the front door with my key, I heard something that made me freeze. Someone was upstairs, walking around in the master bedroom. My first instinct was that there was an intruder in the house. I pulled out my phone, ready to call the police. But then I heard something that changed everything. A woman's voice, talking softly on the phone. She was speaking quietly, but the house's acoustics carried her voice down the main staircase. I couldn't make out all the words, but I could hear enough to understand that this was someone who belonged there, someone who was comfortable in the space. I stood in the foyer for 10 minutes, listening to fragments of the conversation. The woman was discussing doctor's appointments, talking about morning sickness, and mentioning something about keeping the pregnancy quiet until she figured out what to do next. Then I heard something that made everything click into place. She called someone mom,
and said she was grateful to be staying somewhere safe while she figured out her situation. The pregnant woman wasn't a stranger. She wasn't Mr. James's mistress or some random person the Morrison family was helping. She was family. But that didn't make sense. Emma lived in Seattle and wasn't pregnant. The Morrisons didn't have any other daughters. Michael was married and lived in Chicago. Who could this be? I spent the next hour cleaning the lower level of the house while thinking through every conversation I had ever overheard about the Morrison family tree. Mrs. Patricia occasionally mentioned relatives, but never anyone who would be staying in their house for an extended period. The answer came to me while I was dusting the family photos in the living room. There was one photo that had always seemed slightly out of place among the formal family portraits and vacation pictures. It showed a young woman, maybe 22 or 23 years old, with Mr. James's distinctive dark eyes and Mrs. Patricia's delicate features. She was standing between Mr. James and another woman I'd never seen before. I had always assumed this was a family friend or distant relative, but looking at it now with fresh eyes, I saw the resemblance clearly. This young woman looked like she could be Mr. James's daughter. That's when I remembered something Mrs. Patricia had mentioned once, almost 2 years ago, during one of our conversations about family. She'd briefly mentioned that Mr. James had been married once, very young, and that there had been a daughter from that first marriage. But she'd said it in passing, like it wasn't something the family discussed regularly. What if the pregnant woman upstairs was Mr. James's daughter from his first marriage? What if she had come to her father for help during a difficult pregnancy and the family was keeping her presence secret for privacy reasons? This would explain everything: the expensive maternity clothes, the comfortable way she moved around the house, and the fact that both Mr. James and Mrs. Patricia were actively helping to hide her presence. It would also explain why they were being so secretive about it. If Mr. James's first daughter had been estranged from the family and was now pregnant and in trouble, they might want to keep the situation private while they worked through family complications. But as I continued cleaning that day, I realized there were still pieces of the puzzle that didn't fit. If this was Mr. James's daughter, why was she hiding? Why couldn't she just stay in the guest room openly? Why were they sneaking around and pretending she wasn't there? The answer became clear when I overheard another phone conversation the following week. I was cleaning the kitchen when I heard the woman talking upstairs again. This time, her voice was more emotional, and I could hear tears in her words. She was talking to someone about being scared, about not knowing what to do, and about being grateful that her father and stepmother were letting her stay hidden while she figured out her situation. But then she said something that made my blood run cold. She mentioned being afraid of him finding her. She talked about needing to stay hidden until the baby was born, and then maybe she could figure out how to start over somewhere safe. The pregnant woman wasn't just hiding because of family drama or privacy concerns. She was hiding because she was afraid of someone who might hurt her if they knew where she was. This changed everything I thought I understood about the situation. Mr. James and Mrs. Patricia weren't just providing a place for a family member to stay during a pregnancy. They were providing protection for someone who was in danger, someone who needed to remain hidden for her own safety and the safety of her unborn child. Over the next several days, I started noticing security measures I hadn't paid attention to before. Mr. James had installed new locks on several doors. There were security cameras that hadn't been there before. And I noticed that both Mr. James and Mrs. Patricia were being extra careful about checking windows and doors, like they were worried about someone finding the house. The pregnant woman was in hiding, and the Morrison family was risking their own safety to protect her. But who was she hiding from, and what had happened to make her so afraid? The final piece of the puzzle came 2 weeks later when I accidentally overheard a conversation between Mr. James and Mrs. Patricia. I was cleaning the dining room when they came in for what they thought was a private conversation. They didn't realize I was there, hidden behind the large china cabinet as I organized their expensive dishware. Mr. James was talking about legal papers, restraining orders, and the difficulty of keeping someone safe when their abuser was actively looking for them. Mrs. Patricia was expressing concern about the pregnancy, about medical care, and about what would happen when the baby was born. Then Mrs. Patricia said something that made everything crystal clear. She referred to the woman upstairs as Amanda and mentioned that she was James's daughter from his first marriage. She talked about Amanda's abusive husband, about how he threatened to kill her if she ever left him, and about how she'd escaped in the middle of the night when she found out she was pregnant. Amanda was hiding from her abusive husband. The Morrison family had taken her in and were keeping her safe while she figured out how to protect herself and her unborn child. My role as their housekeeper had given me a front row seat to a family's efforts to save someone's life. But it also meant that I was now carrying the knowledge of Amanda's location, her pregnancy, and her desperate situation. If anyone asked me about the Morrison family, if anyone came looking for information about people staying in their house, my answer could literally mean the difference between life and death. That night, I went home and looked at the photo I'd taken of the positive pregnancy test. What I had initially thought was evidence of an affair or family scandal was actually proof of hope. Amanda had discovered she was pregnant, probably while planning her escape from an abusive marriage. That pregnancy test represented not just a baby, but a reason to fight for a better life. I deleted the photo from my phone and decided to forget I ever seen it.
Over the following weeks, I adjusted my cleaning schedule to give Amanda more privacy. I started arriving later and leaving earlier, ensuring that she had time to move freely around the house without worrying about being seen. I also began leaving small things that might help with her pregnancy. Extra towels in the bathrooms, gentle soaps that wouldn't irritate sensitive skin, and occasionally some ginger cookies that my own grandmother used to make for morning sickness. I never saw Amanda directly, but I could tell she appreciated these small gestures. Sometimes I would find little thank you notes tucked into my cleaning supplies, written in that same handwriting I'd seen in the pregnancy book. 3 months later, I arrived at the Morrison house to find Mr. James and Mrs. Patricia looking happier than I'd seen them in years. There were baby clothes hanging on the line in the backyard, and I could hear the soft sounds of a newborn crying upstairs. Amanda had safely given birth to her baby, and the Morrison family had successfully protected both of them during the most vulnerable time of their lives. I continued working for the Morrison family for another year, during which time I watched Amanda slowly rebuild her life. Eventually, I learned that she moved to a different state, started using a new name, and created a safe, independent life for herself and her child. The Morrison family never knew that I had figured out their secret, but I like to think that my small acts of support helped Amanda feel a little less alone during those frightening months. If you've ever been in a position where you could help someone escape from danger, remember Amanda's story. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is protect someone's privacy, respect their need for safety, and offer quiet support without asking questions. And if you've ever judged a family for being secretive or acting strangely, remember that you might not know the whole story. Sometimes people hide things not because they're doing something wrong, but because they're doing something incredibly right. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories about finding the courage to help others even when you don't know the full situation. Sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is simply mind your own business and let good people do good things in peace.